Hello, and thank you so much for dropping by this video. This is going to be a short talk about addiction. And for anyone who doesn't have an addiction, doesn't struggle with addiction, one of the fascinating things about addiction is it's really next to impossible to understand addiction without having experienced it. So I'd like to talk about what I call the 3 levels of addiction. I didn't come up with this. This is out of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, a pioneering work on the treatment of addictions. And there's so much misunderstanding on this topic of the different levels of addiction. And without this understanding, it's hard to procure proper treatment. So the 3 levels of addiction, as I understand, the first is an extreme habit. Someone's doing a behavior or taking a substance and it's harming them, and they realize it's harming them, and they decide to stop. And with little to no effort, they're able to stop. So you could say that person had a problem. They really didn't even have an addiction. Though from the outside, it might seem like it. They may have gotten a little bit out of control. It may have started to impact their life. But if they're able to just stop it, they really don't have an addiction. You could say they had a problem and they were able to fix it. Now, the next is what I call a hard user. And by user, I can be talking about pornography, alcohol, drugs, overeating, any addictive behavior, gambling. So a hard user is someone who they really get into it, and they really can't stop. They literally can't stop. They lose control unless there's something, a really good reason to stop, such as a stern warning from a doctor, like, hey, this is going to kill you if you don't stop. Or, a spouse says, I'm going to leave if you don't stop. So a hard user is able to use their willpower, though it's difficult, and maybe they lapse a little bit here and there, but they're able to moderate or stop, but only if there's an extreme reason. It's kind of got to be a life or death or a make or break their life reason. But they are able to stop or moderate, maybe not perfectly, but it's difficult. It's not easy, but they can do it. So I would say, in my view, that person really, in the way I think of addiction, that person really is on the cusp of addiction, but they don't quite have an addiction. Again, that's why I call them a hard user. Now, here's the person who has a real addiction. They can't stop no matter what. If their spouse says, I'm leaving you, they may try to stop, but they can't. If their boss says, hey, I'm going to fire you, they may be able to stop for a short period of time, but invariably they fall back into it. Someone who has a real addiction has genuinely lost their willpower. They're not able to stop. And without a radical change, or without some radical outside intervention, which in my view really has to be a higher power or a spiritual experience or a complete spiritual reorientation, they're gonna do the behavior until they die. If they're an alcoholic or an addict or an overeater, they're going to eat themselves, drink, or drug themselves to death. If they're a pornography addict or a gambling addict, they're going to which can't kill you, right? They'll do the addiction until they're so emotionally damaged and their life is destroyed that they actually kill themselves. So, and so this idea that it requires a spiritual experience or a spiritual reorientation isn't mine. It was the great psychologist, psychiatrist Carl Jung, who said that people of that third kind, they've lost their willpower. There's literally no, and unless they're locked up, they will always go back to the addictive behavior. So I was of that third category, and I help people free of charge who are serious, who are in that third category, to find freedom, to find a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening that can free themselves from really an unsolvable problem. There's no, for that third class, and see, there's a lot of confusion because, people take that second class, the hard users, and like, oh, well, they were able to quit with willpower. Well, it's a very different situation than the third class, the real users who really have lost their willpower. For someone of the second class, I would someone who has a hard user, the smart recovery is an amazing thing that engages one's will. And for someone of the hopeless variety, I would recommend the original 12-step program. Very different from the modern program of really surrendering to God and relying on God. And I put my email below for anyone who has any kind of addiction and is of that third class, and I'm happy and available to help. Thank you so much for watching this video. Take care.